Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending our presentation discussing access brokers and ransomware operators and activities and patterns. We really appreciate you taking the time to join today. My name is Samantha and I'm an intelligence analyst in Intel 471, and I'm based in the Netherlands.
And hi, everyone. My name is Beth Allen, and I'm also an intelligence analyst at Intel 471 from the UK.
So here's the agenda for today's presentation. First, we'll be going over the background, so what an access broker really is and how these threat actors operate on underground forums. And then we'll dive into how we conducted our research and explore some of our findings. But lastly, we'll conclude with our assessments, some mitigation recommendations, and some actionable takeaways. So what actually is an access broker? All the ones that we discussed today operate on cybercrime forums in which they sell access to organizations' networks to other threat actors. They obtain this network access in different ways based on their preferred methods. So they can do this by engaging in active scanning with tools such as iSpy or MassCan, Nmap, or SoftPerfect. They may also opt to leverage SQLI or RCE vulnerabilities to gain access to target networks and databases. Or they can actually purchase access credentials from other threat actors and then resell them at a higher price to make a profit. They typically offer these accesses in batches, so they can range from a few to hundreds at a time. And they're typically offered for sale from $500 to $2,000 US. That's just an average, though. We sometimes see them offered for less, and sometimes we see them offered for much more. So one of the actors that we'll actually discuss later today, they actually offer about upwards of $40,000 US for some of their batches. And that's much higher than what we see for a lot of other access brokers, but it's really based on the actor's consistent positive reputation and the valid offerings that they'd offered in the past on the cyber underground. And based on our analysis of top access brokers in 2022, we determined 4 common characteristics. So these actors have really positive reputations in the underground. They get really positive reviews from actors who have communicated with them in the past or purchased access credentials from them and were really satisfied. They're also opportunistic. And what we mean by this is they're not only obtaining initial access to organizations in just a certain sector or a certain industry or a certain geographic region, but they're really gaining access wherever they can obtain the access. And this is really important because it increases their available accesses that they can actually obtain at any given time, and it widens the pool of potential cyber criminals who actually want to purchase them. Additionally, these prominent access brokers ensure the accesses that they're selling are valid and that they can actually be utilized at the time of the sale in the underground. This is to ensure that their customers will actually be happy and can actually use the actors' offerings that they're buying. And lastly, so these actors were recognized for forming and maintaining the partnerships that we'll be discussing today with other actors on the cyber underground. And this really enhances their abilities and allows them to streamline their operations. So these threat actors, they use cyber underground forums to communicate, to establish the partnerships I just mentioned a little earlier, and to advertise their offerings. And here you can see a couple of screenshots of examples of popular cyber criminal forums. And on the left here, we can see a screenshot of Exploit, which is a really long-standing Russian language forum that was started in February 2005. As of today, it has about 74,000 members. And these members consist of actors ranging from really low level, entry level to sophisticated cyber criminals. On the right is a screenshot of Breached, which is a relatively newly observed forum, which became the home for many actors who actually migrated from raid forums, which was another previously popular cybercriminal forum. Another notable forum that's not pictured here is XSS. That's another Russian language forum, which was launched in late 2018. Exploit and XSS are pretty close to each other when it comes to content and audience, and they're some of the most popular forums that are in use today. And as of today, XSS has about 60,000 members, and actors operating on these forums are interested in financially motivated cybercrime. So now we'll spend a couple of minutes discussing how we view the cyber underground, because a lot of what we'll discuss later in today's presentation is really based on how we view all these pieces fitting together. So we refer to it as the cyber underground instead of the dark web because its structure isn't really deep and it's not really dark. The cyber underground is a really structured environment with loose affiliations of actors who can come together, they can work around certain business processes and value chains, and each actor plays a really particular role in their cycle. So these actors are always looking to form partnerships with other actors so that they can build up their value chains. And this type of activity is really facilitated by the way that the cyber underground is organized. So it's organized really so these actors can form these partnerships. The subjects that the actors discuss, they typically fall into these three main core categories that are pictured here. So products, goods, and services. And products include things such as phishing kits or web injects. Goods include things like credit card data, as well as the actual network access and access credentials that we're speaking about today, and from the access brokers. And services include things such as malware as a service or bulletproof hosting services, or even ransomware as a service. And this is where the ransomware groups and the ransomware operators that we'll discuss in this presentation operate to provide their services. So something interesting about the credential market is its ability to connect different cybercrime service operations and connect threat actors or groups that heavily rely on compromised credentials to carry out their attack strategies. So compromised access and data facilitate other forms of cybercrime, because one compromised organization can then be victimized by multiple threat actors with different agendas. So now on to Beth to discuss our research and findings.
Thank you, Sam. So today we're going to go over our methodology and how we identified the topic and the steps we took in order to present our research to you today for this presentation. So firstly, we wanted to identify relevant actors. So we utilized our reporting for Q1 2022 to identify the most active access brokers, which we determined through most victim offers to give you an insight into who is the most prevalent right now. This then came to our second stage of reviewing our reporting on these actors and then pulling the victims offered by them and then searching the victim names on ransomware blog sites. After we collected all the data, it was time for us to analyze it. And our main goal with the analysis was to review the posting date of the initial access and the posting date of the victims on ransomware blog sites to identify a dwell time and if there was any correlation between what access brokers are offering and what ransomware blog sites are offering. Once we finished the analysis, it came to writing up this presentation today, which we'll be sharing with you now. But we do want to highlight two important points. Intel 471 operate for a human intelligence driven model. Human intelligence is through human to human interaction. This is how we gather information in order to create reports on events in the underground. This involves engagement with actors such as sources speaking with potential criminals. There is also a requirement when engaging with these actors that the researchers are speaking to the appropriate languages and understanding culture and slang in order to build relationships and good reputation with their personas. But it also highlights the importance of our boots on the ground approach. But please note that during this presentation, we are not highlighting that these access merchants are directly linked to specific ransomware groups. This is a review of organizations whose access were offered on initial underground forums, then were later breached by ransomware groups. It is unclear if any of the groups directly purchased these accesses from the merchants at this time, or if they obtained initial access themselves. To simplify a ransomware attack, we've broken it down into typical 5 stages on how a ransomware group profits. The first stage is initial point of entry. So this is when an actor will initially enter the environment and exploit their victim. This could either be through vulnerabilities, phishing, or even remote desktop protocols. These are just some examples. The second stage is understanding the environment. This links to the reconnaissance stage of MITRE ATT&CK, when the actor will gather the organization's digital footprint to understand roles and accesses, but also identify the company's profits and stance in the industry. This information could then later be used to negotiate the ransomware price. We then move on to lateral movement. So this is when the actor will try and maintain undetected by intrusion systems in order to scope and understand their victim. Actors will try and stay undetected for long periods of time in order to get a full picture of their victim's network. This then goes on to data exfiltration, which is when the actor will exfiltrate data from the systems, which finally leads to the ransomware deployment. So this is when the groups deploy their extortion tactics, which we've also witnessed groups using double extortion tactics, such as distributed denial of service attacks and leveraging the media to add pressure to victim organizations to get them to pay the ransom. We believe it's likely that ransomware operators will continue to diversify attack strategies and use modified extortion methods to increase payment outcomes in 2022.
So here you can see the top 3 most active and impactful access brokers that we analyzed for today's presentation. We assigned them planet-themed aliases, and we mapped the most common TTPs of these actors according to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And across the board, for each of these 3 actors, these included reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, and credential access. This is based on these actors' actions to obtain the capabilities that they need to conduct their operations, to exploit vulnerabilities, and to gather relevant victim, host, and network information. Additionally, the most common accesses offered from these actors posted to cybercrime forums included things like virtual private networks, Microsoft Remote Desktop Web, Citrix virtual apps, web control panels, and malware logs. And later in the presentation, we go a little bit more in depth actually for a case study on the actor of Neptune. So I'd like to highlight a couple of patterns we observed for the other two actors. So Jupyter's most common organization access offerings were in the public sector, so things like education and the professional services and consulting sector, and the technology, media, and telecommunications sector. Then Saturn's offerings were mostly some similar to Jupyter, and that was the public sector, but different from Jupyter was energy, resources, and agriculture, as well as the scientific research and development sector.
So this graphic here maps out the typical steps from an initial access offering to becoming a ransomware victim from our research. The first stage is a vulnerable victim. This could be identified through opportunity or targeted-led network access brokers. An access broker will obtain initial access to organizations and then offer it for sale on the same underground forums occupied by ransomware affiliates. Affiliates then buy these initial accesses, move laterally until the group is ready to deploy ransomware on the victim's network. From all the ransomware demands we were able to capture in Q1 2022, it allowed us to identify an average of $3.79 million US, which equated to a similar average which we witnessed in Q3 2021. Identifying this cycle and monitoring access brokers correctly, it allows for a holistic prevention for businesses to be prepared for stages with ransomware, especially with the average dwell time being 71 days in 2021 from initial access offering to a ransomware offering. However, some actors will witness given a shorter time frame per victim, such as 2 to 4 days. This slide here details our case study on the actor who we give the alias Neptune, who we witnessed being extremely prevalent so far in Q1 2022, but also a consistent history over the last few years. We have also noticed a trend that so far in 2022 that more actors are joining forums to sell access. Neptune has expensive offerings and they need to be purchased in bulk. This shows that the individuals this actor is selling to are not newbies and they will need to have money available. We also observe Neptune typically lists links of compromised entities more than once, which suggests the actor compromised multiple accounts within the same organization. Utilizing our General Intelligence Requirements Handbook, we identified the most impacted sectors shown on screen, which in turn highlighted the education and government industry most targeted by Neptune. The education sector is an interesting target, which could often be overlooked, but actually holds a lot of personal identifiable information and financial data. This could be sold on the cybercrime forums or held for ransom. If there is no payment, there's still means for profit from different actors on the underground. The ransomware groups can also operate strategically when targeting this sector, as when deploying the ransomware during school term times, they could disrupt day-to-day operations for the education industry. The countries impacted in 2022 are displayed on screen, with the top 3 impacted countries being the US, Brazil, and Indonesia. And in 2021, we found that Europe was the most impacted region. In 2021, we found that Neptune offered over 1,000+ victims. The actor allegedly purchased their access from logs across underground forums and directly from malware log vendors. We identified the actor being active over certain periods of time, then going dark. For example, the actor was not active in Q4 2021, but then highly active in Q1 2022. We observed the following ransomware groups: Pfizer, AKM Espinosa, Conti, and LV, with the most overlap of victim offerings matching Neptune's. The image on the screen shows the Conti ransomware blog site. This here is an example of how ransomware groups advertise their victims and keep it up to date with how much data they have released. These blog sites are publicly available, but please be aware of your operational security when accessing these sites. This graph here shows the 7 ransomware groups we identified with the same victims that Neptune offered in 2021. The average dwell time for the top 3 groups that we identified with the most victims of Neptune's were Pfizer with 66 days, Conti with 114 days, and LV with 117 days. Lockbit and Hive had the longest average dwell time, being over 300 days in 2021. But again, these dwell times highlight that we don't have confirmation that these ransomware groups are working with initial access brokers, and it is probable they maintain these accesses themselves. Neptune's overall average was 110 days in 2021, again highlighting the need to track these initial access brokers, as the dwell time for these groups is often over 100 days, as seen with Neptune, which could allow for security teams to identify any irregularities in the network, which can in turn help build their security defenses.
So now we'll dive into assessments that we made based on our research and findings. So as Beth had mentioned, we did observe that the average time between a network access broker offering and a ransomware victim name and shame blog post was 71 days. And this may sound like a longer amount of time than one would expect. So one might expect that once access is for sale, a ransomware group would automatically purchase it and then breach the organization immediately. But it's really possible that it's the case, or it's possible a ransomware group purchases network access far after it's posted for sale. Or a few reasons for the delay in the ransomware victim posting could also be that ransomware operators prefer to linger in the networks that they compromise. They might do this to obtain more sensitive information or to learn about potential third parties that they could later compromise with the data that they're looking at. This duration could also be due to ransomware affiliates first negotiating with victims before they actually post to their ransomware blogs. Then maybe if the ransom is not paid, then they might post to the victim name and shame blog. Over time, access brokers likely will be paid more substantial cuts of ransomware payments and increase their relationships with ransomware groups, so both in quantity and in quality. This could lead to more private conversations occurring, and that would make it more difficult for us actually to track the dwell time, because we wouldn't then have access to these posted accessees that organizations are then later compromised by ransomware groups. The most prominent actors offering access or deploying ransomware will shift over time. They've already shifted since 2021 when we looked at some of this data to 2022, but the trends demonstrated in this presentation will continue to remain relevant for organizations. So these access brokers and ransomware groups will likely to continue forming more and stronger partnerships. And once an initial access to an organization is offered, it is likely that a ransomware organization will breach it in the future. Whether that's the near future or the far future, that's kind of to be determined, but it is a big indicator. Additionally, with other actors that are not mentioned in today's presentation, we, interestingly enough, observed the opposite sequence. So we sometimes saw organizations were first attacked by ransomware, then posted to the name and shame blog, and then only later did we actually see access or vulnerabilities being sold by these network access brokers associated, with the same company and offered for sale then on these cybercrime forums. It's possible that this was due to the cooperation between these access brokers and ransomware groups that we've already seen, and they may share a mutual interest to want to share with each other or sell access. And this could happen following a ransomware breach, so the access brokers can monetize it, or the ransomware groups can also further make money by maybe selling it to the access brokers. So on to some mitigation recommendations. We heard about all this stuff, so what can you guys do about it? So ransomware operators are always looking to seek to improve their attack success rates. And purchasing access to organizations really allows their threat actors to reduce the amount of time it takes to enter these networks, to deploy ransomware or conduct whatever kind of attacks that they want to conduct. It's really important to maintain awareness that the offer or sale of an access to an organization on a forum is an indicator of a ransomware attack. And organizations really need to match to adopt the evolution of cybercrime as organizations need to match their mitigation recommendations to the evolution of cybercrime as it develops, because actors that are operating with access brokers and ransomware affiliate programs, as they're operating and strengthening the relationships, they're going to just continue to grow. So after comparing known techniques of these successful access brokers in 2022, it was evident that defense mechanisms like MFA, privileged account management, and strong password policies could really prevent or reduce the number of successful attempts to these internal accounts. We also recommend monitoring for third-party risk. And it's also possible an organization whose access was offered could be breached, so an actor can then gain access to another company associated with that same network. This could be of more value to the actor because it might have higher revenue, and then the ransomware payment that could be demanded could be much higher. So in the case of third-party risk, companies can reduce this by implementing risk management programs and reducing the amount of information or data stored on third-party infrastructure and minimize third-party access to vital systems. So in summary, the key takeaway from this presentation is that access credentials being sold on the underground are a primary indicator of a potential ransomware attack. Therefore, it's really critical that all organizations monitor for network access being sold on cybercrime forums for both their accessees as well as third parties. And fundamentally, every cybercriminal wants to speed up their operations, and access credentials are a really easy way to do this. So especially for ransomware programs. So we recommend continuing to monitor this relationship between access credential offerings, ransomware victims, access brokers, and ransomware groups in the future. Thank you guys all so much for attending, and feel free to reach out to us on email, our website, our LinkedIn's, or on Slack, and we'll try and get to all your questions following this presentation. But now we'll take some questions from the audience.